Good morning, Mr. Vadivell and dear classmates. This presentation is about Chapter 19, Yours or Mine, from the book The Hidden Life of Trees by Peter Wohlleben. Summary. So this chapter displays the fact that forests are not simply a delicate balance like we have previously thought. The author explains that the forest is basically a huge fight for survival, and all the inhabitants of the forest are ruthless. Forests are held together by a bond called competition or fight for life. This chapter gives many examples of the violent relationship between trees and herbivore pests and animals. It first briefly describes what a forest is, and then starts listing and explaining the relationship of trees and pests. On page 114, it describes the relationship between woodpeckers and trees. The author then brings the attention of the audience to the aphid issue, which is followed by the midges and wasp issue. Those are all pests that trees are struggling with. On page 117, caterpillars are introduced as another pest that the trees must face. The chapter then describes a few ways the trees use to defend themselves. This is followed by the description of the relationship of spruce trees and black beetles. The chapter finishes by describing how large herbivores harm young trees. The chapter includes many famous characters in the forest ecosystem. The great protagonists are, of course, the majestic trees. The antagonists are the pests, which are the herbivores that feed on the trees. The chapter is mainly talking about those two types of living organisms. The thing that all living organisms are longing for is the precious nutrients that the trees are guarding within its bark. Like the author mentioned on page 113, every species wants to survive, and each take from each other what it needs. All animals and plants are seeking survival, hence they all need the nutrients to be able to survive and reproduce. All the battle and ruthlessness are occurring within the forest, where massive numbers of trees are situated. Pests and animals feed in large numbers on many trees. Therefore, the fight and all the struggles happen within the forest. The chapter switches from season to season, and it brings the readers to understand the many challenges that trees face during those seasons. Different pests and animals attack at different times in the year. For example, the investive caterpillars mentioned on page 117 attack the leaves in June, which is in summer. Fungus mushrooms, on the other hand, start attacking the stumps of the trees in autumn. All the fight and struggles are all pointing to one goal, which is to survive. Trees fight for their precious cambium and their sap. The pests and animals struggle to get nutrients. Pests tunnel into the bark to reach the tasty cambium, and woodpeckers make holes to obtain the sap. If animals don't fight for their food, they will not be able to survive nor reproduce themselves. Animals have weapons, and trees have defense capabilities. Birds have beaks with which they can easily pierce bark and wood. Pests are small, and they attack from the leaves. Aphids, aided and protected by ants and fungi, are even more successful when feeding on the tree's sap. Trees, on the other hand, also have weapons to defend itself. They produce defensive compounds which can allow the bark to grow thicker. Trees are also very resilient, and they can produce scents to attract predatory organisms to eat the pests. Trees also produce chemicals that kill pests and stops them. Analysis. The theme of this chapter, as the title infers, is a battle between trees and parasites. Yours or mine is a fight between the living organisms in the forest for survival. This chapter shows the many challenges that a tree must face when it is growing. It gives examples of infestive pests such as aphids, caterpillars, birds, bark beetles, large herbivores, and invasive funguses. It also gives examples of how trees defend themselves, such as the use of scents and chemicals to repel pests and attract predators. From this chapter, we learn that forests do not abide by humane or fair laws. Instead, they abide to the law of the jungle, like described on page 113. Forests are societies where everyone wants to live, and they take ruthlessly from others. This system does not collapse because it is all held together thanks to a systematic safeguard that limits any species that takes more than what it needs. This barrier can be found in the genes of the species. This means that if a species takes more than what it needs, it will naturally die, since its genes decide the amount of nutrients needed. Every species wants to survive, and each takes from others what it needs. Page 113 is a quote from chapter 19 stating that life within the forest is not harmonious, and that the system is all about taking from other living organisms. This is a fact that I think is worth sharing. Forests are violent, even though it all happens so slowly. There is truly a battle for food and life. Whenever you walk through a tall, dark forest, you are walking down the aisle of a huge grocery store. Page 114 is a quote from the same chapter stating the fact that forests are filled with a plethora of living organisms, such as animals and bacteria. It is quite true that forests are comparable to grocery stores, filled with goods. There is always a great variety within. A better description would be a heavily guarded warehouse, for there is no question here to just helping yourself. Page 114 is the last interesting quote that I took from chapter 19. It clearly explains that to get the sweet treasures, one must come up with a plan. Getting nutrients from trees is hard and challenging, and that is a fact. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.